Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet, talking to you from the nation's capital, Ottawa, Ontario, recording this at my mom's. Got the poppy here, November the 11th this week, Remembrance Day. It's a big day in Canada. With me, as always, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler and Solomon Schechter, Day School, Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky of Congregation Anshe Chesed, New York City. This is an amazing Parasha Vayetzei. Vayetzei is filled with movement, and filled with naming, and filled with lots of different kinds of tangled relationships. We'll get right into it. Vayetzei Yaakov mi Beersheva vayelech Harana. What happens to Yaakov when he leaves? I'm turning to you, Jeremy. Tell us what happens, and tell us specifically about the naming that goes on.
So Jacob, you remember at the end of the last parasha, having stolen or exploited or whatever you want to say, he's gotten the means of his father's blessing. Esav is chasing him out of town. So his mother and his father send him to Mesopotamia to marry one of his cousins. And that was the end of the last parasha. Now he leaves. Vayetzei Yaakov mi Beersheva. He leaves the nest where he's been raised. Vayelech Harana, and he turns towards Haran, the major city, which today is in the southern tip of Turkey, right above the Syrian border. And I've never been there, of course, but I hear it's a tremendous archaeological site. And one of the interesting pieces of the name is that in Aramaic, Harana means the other one, and the word for the demonic in Kabbalah is the Sitra Achra, the other side. And the Zohar, much is made that he leaves the place of order, Eretz Yisrael, Vayelech Harana, and he goes towards the demonic side. He has to go out into a world that is going to be very dangerous and frightening. And of course, this is true. The place of his time in Mesopotamia will be very fruitful. He will come back with 4 wives and a bunch of children, but he will also have survived lots of dangerous, nasty, dastardly deeds by his father-in-law. We say in the Haggadah, the line from Deuteronomy, Arami Oved Avi. The pshat of that line, the simple semantic meaning is my father was a wandering Aramean, but the way we read that midrashically is that Arami Oved Avi, the Aramean Lavan, tried to kill my ancestor Jacob. So this is a scary place.
So this is the first encounter that we see of Jacob as a character on his own. And I guess the way I picture him is he's really got nothing. And this is quite unusual. And it sets up a real contrast between him and the other traveling that took place between Canaan and Haran, that was the servant who came with a whole caravan of camels. We don't have that with Jacob. We barely even have him going with food. But we do know that he has a flask of oil. And we do know that that flask of oil is significant in terms of the motif that really accompanies Jacob throughout his life, and that is, Barry, the rocks.
Okay, but before we get to the rocks, I just wanted to suggest one thing, that when Jacob leaves Beersheba, he's leaving the future. That was where his father and grandfather both lived at various times. And he's going back to the past, which is where Abraham came from Haran. And I think that what we get in the opening scene is this idea that Jacob leaves Canaan with nothing, but he actually has a lot more than he thinks. Because the place he happens to lay his head to rest is a place where he will have a vision of God. And he will wake up stunned by the realization that God was with him all along, and he was totally oblivious.
He said,
yes,
I would say, okay, so I made a face here, because even when he anoints the thing and consecrates that place, he phrases his vow in a very strange and conditional way. Vayidar Yaakov neder lemor. Jacob made a vow saying, Imi Elohim imadi, if God will be with me, Ushmarani baderech hazeh, and keeps me on this way, asher ani anochi holech, on the way that I'm going, V'natan li lechem lechol uveged lilbosh, and if he gives me bread and clothing, v'shavti b'shalom, And if I return in peace, El Beit Avi, to my father's household, Vaya Adonai li Elohim. That's a big tall order.
Okay, I think that Jacob is actually a better theologian here than the rabbis.
Okay.
And I think that what we have to keep in mind is that God is probably understood as a local, or at best a national God. So when Jacob is leaving his homeland, Canaan, he might be leaving God behind him. He doesn't know if God is going to be able to accompany him. And he knows he will only come back if, in fact, he will find food and clothing to sustain him while he's away.
It's a great theme, because the idea of the local gods or gods accompanying, that's something that's going to figure much later. I don't even think we're going to get to this with Rachel and the local and her trafim, which is a way of really trying to demonstrate the accompaniment of the household gods with her. But
I would say that, by the way, I would say that this is pshat, or at least Rashi takes it to be pshat, and I think it's at least a good guess that that's the meaning of the angels going up and down the ladder, that he's leaving the place, and so the Eretz Yisrael angels have to go back up to heaven, and the Chutz La'aretz angels, the foreign dwelling angels, have to come down to support him. And I think that the image of, well, there's a way to read the vow, which is not that if you do all that stuff, then I'll consider you my God, but if you do all that stuff and prove that you're my God, then I'll give you the tithe. But I do think that this adds to the feeling that this story is quite like open-ended. We don't know what's going to happen. Is he going to starve to death? Is he going to have clothes and food to eat? Or is he going off into this scary zone? And we'll see what happens.
All right. Can you give me your best take on Vayikra et Shema Makom Hahu Beit El V'ulam Luz Shema Ir L'Rishonah?
It had been a city of losers, and now it became the house of God.
So he named the place Beit El, and it was formerly known as Luz. Okay, so who lived there? Bunch of losers.
And I think we also have to understand Beit El quite literally. It was a house of God. It was a local shrine.
Okay,
but he didn't know that.
But Jeremy, you were saying that there's something about the attribution of names that is distinct to him, or maybe not. I mean, you want to just take that
the whole parasha, and then again into the next parasha, when Jacob wrestles with the angel and gets a new name. This whole section of the Torah is really very significant about the names that people have. There's naming of places at the very end of this parasha. You'll get the only Aramaic in the Torah when Jacob and Lavan make a deal, make a pact, and at the place, Jacob gives the place the name Gal Ed, the pillar of witness, and Lavan calls it Yigar Sahaduta, exact translation into Aramaic. Yeah. So they named that place. And here we have the name of place Beit El. It's a little bit confusing, by the way, because you sort of want it to be Jerusalem, but Beit El is north of Jerusalem. Yeah. So Rashi, if I remember correctly, I didn't look it up now, but I think that he tells this complicated story, like the base of the ladder that he sees is in Jerusalem, but it's at an angle, and so the top of it is Keneged, it corresponds to Beit El, where it hits heaven. It's a slightly confusing passage. But then there's the naming of all the children, and the naming of the children is a significant expression also of the meaning of those individuals' lives and the meaning of the parents' lives. Leah gets to name her children. Rachel gets to name her children. They get to name the children of the.
They're all named by the women.
There's one child, though, who's not named, and that is Dinah. She is just given the name. It's not explained. And when we get to chapter 34, we'll see that, in fact, she was a judgment on the family.
Interesting. Okay, but before we get there, let's go back. Vayisa Yaakov Raglav Vayelech Artza V'Nekedem. So after he had this revelation and this dream, Vayisa Yaakov Raglav, he picks up his legs and he goes to Artza V'Nekedem, the place of the east. And often we like to say, what makes the Torah great? It's great storytelling. It compresses, 400 miles into it's more than 400
words.
It's about 800. It's a long distance into
a while.
It's a while, right? And all of a sudden, a journey of maybe a week, 2 weeks, he ends up, it's the light of day. Vayar v'hinei be'er basadeh. He sees there's a well in the middle of the field. V'hinei sham shlosha edrei tzon rovtzim aleha. 3 flocks are hovering over it. Ki min habe'er hi yashku et ha'adarim. We get this kind of determination. We understand that he's figuring this out. This is the well that they use. Va'even gdola al pi habe'er. And the rock is big on the well. All right, pick it up from there. He's going, and all of the flocks are there, and Yaakov has this really amazing encounter with the people there. He says, "Achai, man, bro, hey, where you from? Where you from?" And they say, "We're from Haran." And he says,
well, why does he ask that question?
He's trying to figure out where he is.
Does he not know where he is?
There, he doesn't have a map. He doesn't have Google Maps. He doesn't have a GPS. The only thing that he knows is what his mommy told him. Because his mom is from that place. So that place must be populated with things that landmarks that she may have placed in his mind. I have no other way of imagining the situation other than him saying, "Where am I?" Talking to passersby, saying, "How close am I to Haran?"
I never, every story from the ancient world, I'm so, my limitations of imagining how people got anywhere and knew anything and they walked hundreds of miles, and the only thing that he remembers is that his mother and his father sent him off to go to Padan Aram. This is the end of last week's parasha. And go to Padan Aram, go to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take a wife there from among the daughters of Lavan, your mother's brother. And they send him off, and he goes to Padan Aram, and he walks to Mesopotamia. And as we're sitting here, I just went up in my Google Maps, and I discovered that Haran from Amman, Jordan, a little bit farther, is like 886 kilometers, 700 and some, around 800 kilometers from Amman. So throw another few kilometers on there. He's going like hundreds and hundreds of miles, and he says, "Hey, do you guys happen to know someone named Lavan?" And they go, "We know him."
Of course, that's what
It's
makes
like
the
when you
Bible
meet
great.
someone, you say you're from New York, and they say, "Oh, maybe you know so and so."
Yeah, I'm from New York, but they're from New Jersey. You know Elliot Malamet?
Yeah, what's amazing is that they say, "Yeah, we know him." Yeah, and here's his daughter, Verachel ba imatzon, right? Good onomatopoeia. She is coming with the sheep, ba, with the sheep. And if you'll permit me to propose my little interpretation here, I think these guys are waiting for her because they know she's babe. She's really beautiful, and I also think that there's a reason why they're waiting over the well. It's very strange, this whole story, why they can't have access to the well. You may say that it takes more than one person to move the stone that's on the well. The stone was big on the well, and I agree. Although we see in the next scene that Jacob single-handedly moves the stone. So it's not beyond the strength of one individual. So there's another reason why the stone is there. And the reason is because people cheat in this area, and they don't want unfair access to the shared resource. And if everybody is there, even during the height of the day, everybody will be able to govern the allocation of the resource in an equitable fashion. And the reason why that happens is because there's one character hovering off stage right now who is really quite a manipulative and dastardly cheat, and that's Lavan.
So you really think his name is quite ironic then?
Absolutely. He's like Dr. what in Breaking Bad, what was he called? Dr. White.
Oh, Walter White.
Dr. White.
Walter White, yeah.
Walter White.
Eisenberg.
Right. Why? Because it's an ironic thing. The Lavan is ironic. There's no Lavan here. He's all dark.
Well, whatever. The problem we talked about this before we started recording. Like, one of the reasons that this is not grabbing me here is that your explanation requires two things to be deposited about the same society. One is that it is extremely sneaky, and two, that it takes pains to make sure that it's extremely equitable. Both of those things don't go together so well. I bet you, and I don't know, not being an ancient shepherd myself, I bet you that in wells, there are rocks to cover them over to prevent Barry proposal we were talking before, some contaminants fall into it, a dead body or something like that. I think that there are probably just covers on wells, and ordinarily it's a really big thing and it requires multiple people to cooperate. But Jacob, when he sees Rachel, demonstrates his enormous strength and macho virility, that he can do this all by himself. And by the way, it's a perfect match for all of the patriarchs and matriarchs, or the most important ones. Abraham's great deed involves feeding strangers. Rebecca's great deed involves watering the camels of a stranger. And Jacob's great deed involves taking the stone off the well and giving water to all the flocks. It's a beautiful, repetitive, tight pattern that our great patriarchs, they demonstrate their greatness by their kindness, their generosity in giving people sustenance.
So I want to say something in defense of Elliot. I think he makes too much of the cheating aspect and not enough of rules development. That in fact, it's a primitive society and they're still working out the rules. So they understand that resources have to be allocated fairly. It's not that they're concerned with cheating, but we all know that left to our own devices, we'll take a second piece of pie before everyone has had the first one if we can. And so we need some rules, and they're starting to work out these rules now.
This is the middle. This is the middle.
I forget the name of the writer, but written up in the Times this week, and there was they have an op-ed in the Sunday section. There's these two folks who've written this new, like one of these big histories, like Germs, Guns, and Steel, but the history of Homo sapiens. And they posit, interestingly, not as the typical story has been, that once the agricultural revolution happened, some people got wealthy and exploited, and then inequality was introduced in the ancient city, which was made possible by agriculture, and the great extremes of wealth and poverty were created at that time. They posit that actually ancient cities, at least some of them, were much more equitable places. Truthfully, when I read somebody interpreting archaeology, I'm like, what are you talking about? There's a building. You don't know what its function was, right? You're making some stuff up. But in all events, their claim was that there was much more in the ancient city, much more attempt at equity. And so that does fit what Elliot was saying.
What I'm saying is, and I think, again, it has to do with the fact that this is we're in the Middle East, man. If there's one thing that everybody needs, it's water. And there's one thing that everybody needs to share, it's water. So, I'm putting a layer of theft and stealth and cheating over this, because I know hovering in the background, there's a thief and a cheat in the background. And there's these characters that I want to kind of flesh out. And I want to say, these shepherds, they're waiting for one person. They're waiting for Rachel, because that's when the watering can happen, when everybody's there. She's Lavan's daughter. There's a reason for all of this. Okay, but put that aside. So the fact that Jacob basically impulsively says, "What the hell is going on here? Right? Why are you waiting here?" And then single-handedly lifts the rock off the well. Not only defines himself as a person of great strength, but also defines himself as, I'm not going to listen to your stupid orders. I'm not going to play by the rules here. I'm going to go outside the rules. And I think that's it's an inviting subtext for Jacob, because he already has not played by the rules, and he doesn't want to play by the rules. And when he goes to Lavan, and they bring him to meet Lavan, he says in that beautiful line, "Ach atzmi uvisari ata," behold, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And you are nodding to that, Jeremy, because you know some truth in that. What is he saying there?
Oh, I think that he is exactly saying that they are birds of a feather, these two. They are matched sets of tricksters.
Exactly.
Well, okay. So I think if we want to play nice, which we do occasionally, rather than say that Lavan is a trickster, he's a businessman. And he's trying to conduct business in a world that is somewhat hostile. And therefore, you have to do things in order to make sure that you protect yourself and your family.
So this is exactly a certain cantor from Long Island sent us in some questions to parshatalk@gmail.com. Anyone should feel invited to do the same, about the deception in this story, and when is it okay to engage in deception? Do you always have to use sneaky means to get a good end? Our story about Yaakov from last week, our story about Yaakov and his mother Rebecca, is that means fair or foul. You gotta have the blessing go in the right direction. Certainly can't let Esau be the inheritor of the covenant of Abraham. But now it's going to come back to bite Jacob, because just as he had a sibling switched identity to deceive somebody who couldn't discern, exact same thing is going to happen to him. And Lavan is going to pull off the same trick. We're going to think that Lavan is sneaky, but Lavan is actually giving Jacob exactly his own medicine. So, is he a businessman? Is it not possible to be a businessman who is not sneaky? I don't know if it's possible or not, but it isn't true in this case.
He's trying to show who's sneaky. He's trying to show.
What you're suggesting, Jeremy, is that in the scene with Rachel and Leah, when he gets married, Jacob becomes Isaac. But by the end of the Parsha, when he acquires all of Lavan's flocks, he's actually become Lavan.
That's great.
Let me interject here and say that I think that he's really, in this moment, he's saying, he sized up Jacob. He's saying, "You're bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh." We're cut from the same cloth, okay? But I want to show you who's boss here, okay? And it reminds me of this great hockey anecdote. You'll appreciate this since I'm in Canada.
We know I'm calling.
When Bobby Orr was a rookie, okay? Bobby Orr was the greatest player, okay? And he skated faster than anybody else. And one game was the Detroit Red Wings against the Boston Bruins, and he was
up
against Gordie Howe, and he was
2 years old.
He was trying to outplay Gordie Howe, and come up against him, and then finally Gordie Howe just gave him an elbow in the face, and he said to Bobby Orr, "Welcome to the NHL." So this is the point. The point is that Yaakov is smart, Yaakov is conniving, Yaakov is a cheat, and Lavan is his match. And in the moment that he replaces the beloved Rachel with Leah, he is really outsmarting Yaakov and saying, welcome.
So justly, in a midah keneged midah way, a measure for measure way, because Jacob is getting his comeuppance for the deception that he has practiced. And he is going to, but in the end, by the way, I don't know anything about Gordie Howe and Bobby Orr, but Jacob actually wins. And I love what Barry just said about Jacob becomes Isaac, and then in the end, he becomes Lavan. When there is the next level of deception, the sort of magical animal husbandry thing that happens at the end, that Jacob practices to turn all of the sheep into speckled or spotted, whatever it is. When he makes the deal with Lavan, he says, "Okay, you can keep the akudim, nikudim, ubrudim, and I'll keep the white ones. You keep the brown ones." Jacob manipulates the color of the sheep. It's impossible to think of what it is that he's doing, but whatever, in the Bible's terms, it works. So he takes a makel livneh, which they translate as a poplar stick. Livneh sounds like Lavan. And what does he do? V'yifatzel bahem pitzalot levanot. He makes white strips. So he turns all machsof halavan, revealing the white or revealing the Lavan. So in the course of it, I think Barry's great observation. Jacob, in his full Lavanness, sneakiness, disreputable, he's actually the master. And so Carol asked us earlier, Barry's wife Carol asked us, before, when is it okay to steal? Is it okay ever to steal? The Midrash wants to say that Jacob wants to say, if you're going to deal with a disreputable person, you have to play them at their own game. Im chasid tit chasad, be righteous with the righteous. The im, what's the phrase? The im var tit davar, and with the scoundrels be a scoundrel. So Jacob is exactly that. And finally, Carol also asked us about the phrase vayignov et lava. What's the phrase? He steals the heart. The Hebrew phrase, classical Hebrew phrase for deception is genevat da'at, to steal the mind, or genevat halev is what we get here in Genesis, to steal the heart. This is a parsha of lots and lots and lots of stealing, from the deceptions that went on, but to the specific phrases about stealing the heart, stealing the sheep, and then stealing ultimately. Jacob says to Lavan, by the way, Gunavti yom gunavti laila, my days and nights were stolen away from me. I was working so hard for you. And then ultimately, a story which we're not going to get to probably, is that Rachel steals Lavan's idols. She apparently wants to hang on to those idols of her childhood, from her childhood home.
Okay,
that enabled Lavan to make an idol threat.
Let me ask you this question, and we had some conversation about this too, which is, there's a lot of pathos here regarding the relationship between the two sisters, Leah and Rachel. There's a lot that the Torah is drawing our emotional attention to their lives together. And I'm wondering, just as a setup for this, this family comes to you for family therapy, or first react to the pathos of these women, and they're here are 3 adult male rabbis, but we have enough empathy, and we can see that there's something going on here that's really quite tragic. There's emotion, and there's a lot of pain. Jeremy, you want to tell us about the pain here?
Oh my goodness, Leah is one of my favorite characters because of her suffering. It opens up the heart to read about her. Just try to place yourself in the mind of the older but less successful sister. Her younger sister is
beautiful,
so beautiful. Everybody wants her attention. Jacob just lays eyes on her, and it's just love at first sight. And what happens? Lavan says, well, in our rule, we don't give away the older before the younger.
The younger before the older.
We don't give away the younger before the older. Exactly. Unlike, by the way, exactly what Yaakov had pulled off in his own hometown. In our place, Lavan says sneakily, we don't give away the younger before the older. So here's what I'm going to do. Leah, honey, I know nobody wants to marry you, but I'm going to, nobody in their right mind would ever want to marry you. But what I'm going to do, don't you worry, honey, I'm going to trick somebody into marrying you. Oh my God, that's just got me agony. Jacob is mad the next morning after having spent the night with his new wife, and one can have to guess, like either they just kept all the lights out, they extinguished all the candles, as the Midrash says, or they got him good and drunk and he didn't know. And he wakes up in the next morning and he has just slept with his new wife, and he discovers it's not the love of his life, Rachel. It's her undesirable older sister. And he says to her, oh, what the hell are you doing here? Oh my God, the agony that must have been in poor Leah's experience is just unimaginable.
It's really one of the most implausible stories of the Torah, okay? And a difficult story. But let me offer 2 twists here. One is that he actually likes having the multiple wives, okay? Because one wife ends up being the wife of procreation, and one wife ends up being the wife of companionship, shall we say, okay? And that follows a certain typology of multiple wives in the Bible. Sarah companion, Hagar procreator, and Chana Penina, the wives of Elkanah, Chana the companion, Penina the procreator. So there may be something there. But let me pose this one to you, which is that maybe he really wants Leah too, and maybe he knows the situation. I know it's a stretch beyond the elasticity of most of our imaginations, but he's got a mission, and the mission is to make a nation. So he's got to start pumping out kids. And is there something that he saw in the two sisters in the month that he was there without reward, without recompense or salary? Did he fixed his mind on Rachel, but maybe he thought, yeah, get 2 for 1 here. I don't know.
I think that's one of your wonderful misreadings. So I want to suggest something else, if I may, and that, it's instructive that Rachel, her name means sheep, and she's a shepherd. And there's a certain hardness to her that's embodied by her name. She goes out to work. Leah is described as rakot, soft. And, I kind of picture her as an image that one used to portray the farmer's daughter who did all the right things, but no one looked at her. And that's the kind of person that Leah is. She's not the shepherd because she's the domestic. She's working at home, as it were. She doesn't go out to the pasture. And yet she is able to produce half of Jacob's sons by herself.
More than that.
And
Well, not by herself.
that's correct. The other religion says that you can do that by yourself. Well, Leah, but we were talking a little bit before about the names. Every name of a child draws attention to a fundamental unhappiness. And the idea that she wants to have a kid so her husband will love her, will give her the attention, not just that she needs, but that she deserves.
Totally
You get
correct.
the idea, every time she brings a son to Jacob, he says, okay, thank you. Let's move on.
This is totally correct, and this is the heartbreaking thing. But Leah also goes on a spiritual journey of herself, because the first one is Reuven ki ra'a Adonai be'oni. He called him Reuven, see the son, because God has seen my see myself.
Affliction.
Ata Yehavani ishi. Now my husband will love. Then she gets pregnant again. But Shama Adonai ki snua anochi. God has heard, so she calls him Shimon, because God has heard my suffering. But ben ata hapa'am yilaveh ishi elai. This time, finally, my husband will join up with me, because I've given him 3 children. It never works. Jacob is obtuse. He's unloving towards her. He's just not nice. And finally, she has a child, and she calls him Yehuda hapa'am odeh et Adonai. This time I will thank God. I will find gratitude in my life and not think that one more child will finally change Jacob. It's like the therapist says, your loved one, your husband is not going to change. He's not going to change, and he doesn't change. Interestingly, by the way, of course, I think it's fair to say that we are inclined to think that society, socially speaking, males exploit females sexually, males commodify female sexuality, turn it into something to be controlled, bought, and sold. There is a purchase of sexuality in this parasha, but it's not by a man of a woman, it's the other way. When Reuven finds these mandrakes, which is like some sort of aphrodisiac or some sort of, what would you say, some aid to fertility or whatever, Rachel wants to buy the mandrakes because she wants the useful aid to fertility. So she pays, Leah sells the mandrakes to her for Jacob's sexual services. And it's very clear, and that's why Yisachar, whose name means business or purchase, Sachar, reward. Yeah, that's why he's named Yisachar, because she paid for Jacob's sexual services for that night. Rachel, being the beloved wife or the companion wife, as Elliot said, seems to be in charge of doling out who Jacob is going to have sex with.
Yeah. which
So I
kind of
have to add something before we continue. And we were talking a little bit about Lavan and Yaakov before, and we often overlook the generational difference. That Lavan, for obvious reasons, is old enough to be Yaakov's father, and Jacob, I think, has a potential to change. In other words, he acts in ways that we find wanting in this parsha and elsewhere, but he can grow out of these things, I think. And it leads to a further observation that, in the later biblical law, a man cannot marry two sisters. And the proof, if one needed it, is the story of Rachel and Leah. And the reason why we need the law, of course, is because everyone who finds themselves in a situation where they're attracted to two sisters is going to say, oh, no, I can make this work. And the law comes to say, you can't. That the law speaks in a way that it curbs some of our impulses, and the rest of the Torah really comes to teach us how we're supposed to behave, not like our ancestors in Bereshit.
So that's a good way to kind of put the bow on this. We're running out of time here, and we're kind of leading up to next week, which is, following all of these different challenges that Yaakov faces, including the challenges of building his family, the challenge of the relationship between his two wives, his four wives, and his challenge with his father-in-law, which he gets to resolve, and he creates the boundary moment. And it's precisely after this boundary moment that he now has to come back and face what is waiting for him in Canaan. And that's where the Parsha leaves us, I think, with this kind of anticipation as to what will happen next in his life. We read the story. We know what's going to happen. So no spoiler, but we're ready. We're ready for a new Yaakov here. And I think as we conclude this, we see all of the different things that he's gone through, the way that he as a character has grown, and the way everybody has really grown with him. The family altogether has become quite substantial. And there's a sense that we're ready for something. Something has changed here. I don't know if you concur with that, but we're ready to conclude this edition. I think we've been enjoying having this conversation and debate and being with you. And we want to thank you for doing that and spending some time with us as you get ready for Shabbat and listen and watch us. We're so appreciative. And if you have comments, we appreciate them. Last week we had some great comments on Toldot, and of course we welcome everything they have to say. In the meantime, from Ottawa, Ontario, I want to say Shabbat Shalom, and see you next week.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.